Yeah, is that a, for, yeah, go right ahead. Go right ahead. Just 1 minute, one announcement.
I'm going to ask Dr. Asante to share a call. I just got approval from a journal. The Humanities Journal has approved for me to put out a project dealing with Afrofuturism, African futurism, and Sino-futurism, and it's called Turn to the East. And they just wanted me to change one thing, and it'll be posted. And I'm going to ask Dr. Asante to share it with his network, because now it's going back to that thing of defining the future. And as I was telling Tukufu earlier, I can't believe they approved it, because I don't think they understand what they just approved.
Don't tell them, brother.
So,
Don't tell them. Thank you. You getting ready to tell them or tell them the whole service. They'll cut you off, brother. No, that's right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. No, man, I know how that works. I've been there. We all have been there before. So at this session, yeah, thank you. At this session, thank you very much. That gives us right on time. That's where we are. I must say the speakers have been remarkable today. You have stayed on time. We didn't have to do much, and with the live streaming, because we start at a certain time and they cut you. We cut into the next program. This program will be the first speaker is Dr. Ayo Sekai, and then. Oh, we may gain some time, because we also have Mario Root is the only one who is responding, and so we may have time for more questions from the audience. We depending on how, if they go 20 minutes, we're fine, and but if they go 25, we may have time for one question, and then the fifth session. Will be starting soon after, and that's going to include Professor Kibuma Langmia and Andrea Martinez Celes. And then at that time, during their session, we will make a hookup with Edgar Ridley and Linda Ridley on Zoom. And we will see them on Zoom, because they have been listening, hopefully, to our program, our live stream. So it would be really a wonderful thing to do. So at this time, Dr. Ayo.
I am queen. Walking through the land of milk and honey, I know I've been touched. My great Nubian sister queens have been born and reborn, the great warrior Aminatu, who stood guard over Zaria. Empress Candace of Ethiopia's tactical steel still reign as a residue of my prominence, as I drip the life sources of my people like tears. Stories of my splendor have compelled kings to kneel when they call the name Makeda, the great queen of Sheba. Yet I am always focused on a cause. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to go over, because I prepared a 40 minutes talk, and now I learned that I only have 20 minutes. But we're talking about symbolism, and this book is just incredible, and I don't know how many of us read it. I got through as much of it as I could. It's a great volume. I hope you all pick it up. But good evening, good afternoon. We're all talking about symbols, and we're talking about knowledge and language, and I've heard just so much that I have to share with you today, but of course we don't have time. But it is both an honor. Thank you, Dr. Asante, for having me here. It's always amazing to be here at the MKA Institute. Dr. Asante served on my dissertation committee. I feel such a great, I feel honored that the ancestors guided me here. I had no idea where my path was leading as I was going through school and going on my path, but it led me here through my dissertation, my doctoral process at Howard University, and I came here to interview Dr. Asante for an assignment that I had, and it changed the course of my life. So thank you so much. As a political scientist, linguistic scholar, researcher, and advocate, I am a storyteller of resistance and a publisher dedicated to amplifying Black scholarship and deconstructing systematic power structures that have long dictated the global narrative. I was excited about this book and I couldn't put it down, and I cannot wait to finish reading the entire thing. But The Golden Apple, the anthology Changing the Structure of Civilization by Edgar Ridley, is so strongly aligned with my research and amplifies the understanding of symbolic thought versus symptomatic thought processes. The book discusses the reality that has shaped our histories, knowledge systems, and ultimately our futures. Linguistic imperialism, which is my research, and linguistic imperialism, for those of us who do not know, linguistic imperialism talk about language debt, stealing language and cultural destruction. And it's, for me, what I study as a political science, I study how it's coded in language, in legislation, in policy, that then perpetuated the domination of Black people. But this insidious mechanism of control has functioned as a silent architect of oppression, structuring thought, governance, and identity through the dominance of colonial language. Yet it is also through language that we must resist, reclaim, and reconstruct. This anthology, The Apple of Civilization, offers a provocative analysis of the structures shaping our world, questioning the very foundation of power and urging us to dismantle systems of oppression. This has never been more important before as it is today, as we are watching our democracy crumble over words like woke and anti-racist and CRT and DEI. This is because we are looking at symbolism of words, which solidify the symptomatic meaning in how we understand the world. Mr. Ridley wrote that with the discovery of the concept that symptomatic behavior must override symbolic behavior, a new era of sciences has begun. And he has that on page 314 for those of us who want to see it. And he says, I argue that magical realism forms the core of the falsification of history, oppressing people of color globally. This includes how scientific racism is being applied to eliminate Black African identity. Sorry about that. This process critique the dominant modes of thought in Western civilization, which rely on symbolic abstract representation in human cognition, decision-making, and governance. He argues that the humanity that has been trapped in symbolic thought processes, where symbols represent reality, because they rely on symbolism, our human perceptions are now distorted, reinforcing social hierarchies, racial and religious stratifications, and economic disparities. In order to reverse the mental illness, he instead proposes symptomatic thought process, a way of thinking that focuses on direct experience, action, and understanding that we lead more equitable social structures instead of symbolic manipulation, which he believes is responsible for so many civilizations. So I heard earlier we were talking about words. I'm a publisher, a social science publisher, and one of the things, I focus on words. I mean, as a poet, as a language arts person, I focus on the words. Okay, so we will tell our own story. Our brother over here, the filmmaker, was talking about the storytelling process. We will tell our own stories, the very motto of my press. Because if we do not tell our stories, as so many of the brilliant scholars who stood up here before me today, then we are actually letting and allowing somebody else to dictate to us who we are, how we identify ourselves, and what the name we call ourselves. One of the first things that they did was take away our language when they brought us here in 1619, even though we know that Black people have traveled all over the world prior to 1619. But one of the first things that they did was take away our language, which then destroyed our culture, which then defined us by separating us. So we have to go back there. That's what we need to do. And so this idea of racial and religious ranking is deeply embedded in linguistic constraints and constructs. Colonial powers did not simply conquer land, they colonized our thought. They created hierarchies that placed whiteness at the pinnacle of civilization while regulating blackness in the margins. Through law, through media, education, and religion, this ranking system was reinforced as an assertion that Golden Apple critically engages with. On page 146, he stated that we must use words symptomatically in everything we do. The words like colors refers to conception of black and white, I'm quoting, diametrically opposed symbols of positive and negative. The color black, for the most part, has been a negative symbol that has always been inferior to the world of white. He goes on to give examples of symbolic words that are symptomatic to the perpetuation of domination of black people. We know some of the words like black and white, darkness. I remember when I was writing that poem, Queen, I was in my dissertation process. I called Dr. Asante, and I was talking about the Amazon warriors. Do you remember? And he was like, what Amazon warriors? You need to talk about the Ashanti warriors. And he said, what queens? You need to talk about the African queens. This poem turned out to be the most researched poem I have ever written because of that impact. So we have to go back and we talk about education. We have to tell our children. We have to get back to the root of educating our children, because education is so important that they're looking to dismantle the Department of Education. And we all know why that's happening, right? Because we dare to have an Obama, right? Because they dismantled busing. They dismantled, schooling and segregation, so then black kids were able to go to schools, get whatever education, and then what? Go to Harvard, get access to their Ivy Leagues, and then what happened? We now got an Obama, and then we had the nerve, the audacity to have a Kamala? Okay, so what are they going to do? They are thinking we're going to deconstruct and destroy from the root. Let's send them back to segregation. Let's make sure that they no longer have access to free school and free education. Now our children are going to be, trying to go to school 10 miles away, walking? What are they trying to do? They're going back to giving the education to the states because they want to make sure we no longer have the opportunity to become another president, another MLK, another Malcolm X, another Dr. Walter Anderson, another any one of us that's sitting here. They want to make sure that stops. And the way to stop that is to stop education. So we have to be careful of how we use words, because words have power. Like Dr. Dove said, like Dr. Asante said, like many of you said, 2 sets of notes. Words have power, and how we use words can manifest our destiny. What we believe manifests our destiny. You tell a child that they're no good, why do we need representation? Right? Because representation empowers us to believe in ourselves, to assert our agencies and go back to Afrocentric thought. They don't want that. So we have to be careful about how we use language. And so I don't want to hold up everything, but I want to give some more final thoughts. At the intersection of symptomatic thought processes and linguistic imperialism, the connections between symbolic thought, symptomatic thought process, and linguistic imperialism lie in their shared critique of how dominant power structures use language, symbols, and impose frameworks of thinking to control and manipulate society, particularly marginalized communities. Each concept addresses different but interconnected aspects of systematic oppression and the maintenance of social hierarchies. So in another arena with, of course, economics, linguistic, the systematic control coverage. The global economy is dictated by the language of power, which is English, the language of contracts, diplomacy, and trade. This dominance is no accident. It is a continuation of colonial economic structures designed to privilege the West while creating dependencies in global South. Ridley critiques the economic implication of these systematic rankings, highlighting how financial disparities are rooted in historical oppression. Another reason why they're trying to get rid of the Department of Education and cancel so many government agencies is because Black people have gained economic power. by working at a lot of these federal agencies. Okay, Black people have been able to build wealth, have jobs, and we have the power now and the voice to claim. So now if you get rid of all the Black people, so they say about 20%, the entire country has 17% of Black people. 17%, 20% of Black people are in the federal government. 60% of Black people specifically are in the federal government. But if you do the balance of the math, Black people will be more disenfranchised if you get rid of the federal agencies and get rid of them, because then now what? They keep us confused. We're worried about families and our children, so we can't feed our families. And then, of course, what? Bankruptcy, you no longer have homes. If they take away our economic power, then even everything that we're talking about the marching and the boycotting, how are we going to do that if we have no money? So it's all a state of confusion to ensure that we stay down. So, understanding the symbol and the systematic process that's happening and the intersection of language and how we use that in our representation is very, very important. So I'm going to leave you with just a couple of final thoughts. I'm sorry about that. Couple of final thoughts because I don't want to go over time. I leave you with this. How do we move beyond symbolic oppression and reclaim the authority to define ourselves? 1. 2, what happens when we refuse to use Eurocentric language? And lastly, if language control reality, then how do we take that back, that control? We must deconstruct and impose meanings and reconstruct Afrocentric definitions. And I know Dr. Asante and Dr. Dove are working on Afrocentric definition book that I'm excited to publish soon. So I'm looking forward to that. And we need to reclaim our language and reclaim our agency. And the best way to do that is to educate ourselves. Also, a quick note, we're talking about AI. The best way to protect your work, especially if you're a scholar, is to publish. And if you're not a scholar, get it somewhere. Do LinkedIn publishing, whatever you need to do, because guess what? The training of AI, that's perpetuating the same narrative that white people have been doing historically all the time. 80% of books published have been published by white men. Only 6% have been published by Black scholars. Just think about those numbers. So if they're the ones that's publishing and they have the authority and they're the ones that are the experts in the field, and mind you, because we're academic scholars, we have to publish the most recent books that are published. And we have to publish the top 5 books that are published in our field. So if 80% of the people publishing are white men, who are we citing? Then we're perpetuating the same narrative that are looking at us as objects instead of reclaiming our own agency and our own authority. So we have to make sure that we're putting things in writing, because then we train AI to debunk everything that they're saying, because they have to then consider our works, our writing, and our resource. So thank you very much.
Okay, now the great Mario Root. That's it, right. Wonderful. Good to see you. Hey, man. Thank you, man.
Can I set my computer up here? Okay. I didn't think that. No. I just need it for my notes.
We thought you were going to come up with a poem.
No.
Like Ayo did.
No. I'm much more concrete. I'm not a creative at all. I just want you to know that when I got this information, I've grappled with it, right? And I'm really comfortable doing that. And I was actually kind of excited to get some information that I had never been exposed to before, because it forced me to kind of really think and dig into it. And so this is kind of my personal journey of grappling with this symptomatic thought process. And kind of ironically, one of the first things that I thought about, there's this story that I heard in a church that really, I think, epitomized what he's trying to tell us. I was sitting in church one day, and this preacher was going on and on about tradition. And he came upon talking about being trapped by it, right? And so we just start doing things out of tradition. You don't even know why you're doing them. And he was talking about this really small church in a rural part of Texas. And the church began to splinter when a new preacher came and he wanted to do new things. And one of the things he wanted to do was change how they did communion. And if you've been to church, communion is a very sacred time, right? And in this small church, they would bring out communion and they would put a white sheet over it. And so this is what they did, and this was really important to them. And he came in and said, yeah, we're not going to do communion like that anymore, right? So people got upset, and people are going to leave the church. And here's what the preacher talked about. The preacher said the people had forgotten why they did what they did. So they were putting this sheet over the communion. It was not religious in nature. When the church was first created, it's a really small church in a rural part of town in Texas. And so in the summer, it would be really hot. And so what do you do when it's hot and there's no air conditioning? You open the window. And they were covering the communion to keep the flies out of the communion. Right? That's symptomatic. That's not right. But the people had held on to it so long that even with air conditioning in the building, they were still covering the communion. And so then that is being trapped by the tradition, right? And so that's the symbolism. And that's the story that came to me as I started reading about this. And I actually had to kind of chuckle to myself because that's religion, right? But in that religious story, part of what they were doing was not religious at all. It was they were just responding to their environment. And so they were protecting it from the flies. There are three kind of quotes that I start with as I was reading. One was from Job. He said, when people begin to seek secondary meaning for words rather than give them their usual significance. The other thing, the origin of symbolic thought. Man had no explanation for the phenomena experienced in his environment. These are kind of these thought-provoking quotes. And then the last one, symbolic thought arose out of a failure to deal with reality. This is some heavy stuff he's suggesting, right? And so as we go into this type of stuff, the first thing that I kind of start doing was defending symbolism in my mind, right? And so I have to do some self-interrogation and I have to fight it. But here's some things about symbolism that I think I like. I'm not sure. But this is part of the grappling. And so I start kind of rationalizing. So the first thing is that symbolism can inspire us to act. Right? And so if we know about, for example, Nat Turner, the way in which they describe the moment before he acted, right? And he began to have visions. They say he heard a thunderclap. These were all inspirations for him to go. But that's all symbolic. That's all symbolic because thunder is just thunder, right? Thunder is not anything beyond that. And so it's no different than Sha'Carri Richardson hearing the gun. It's go, right? But he used that as a symbol to act, something he knew he wanted to do, but he needed something to inspire him to go. So that's symbolism. I think that's good. We also all know of our great Dr. King and his I Have a Dream speech, heavy on symbolism, but it was an inspiration to act. He could have given that speech differently without symbolic language and maybe not be as inspiring, right? So those words that can get us to move, to go, to act can be heavy on symbolism. So again, I'm reading this and he's talking about symbolism maybe not being a good thing. And I'm having these experiences where I think symbolism is, right? Symbolism also is kind of a way to expand our mental imagery. And one of our earlier speakers, who's a poet, I believe, talked about grappling with that a little bit. And as I was listening to our filmmaker, because filmmakers are giving us that. I'm a reader. I read a lot. But when I'm reading, especially fiction, I want to be able to see what you're writing. And if you're not able to write symbolically, I'm going to struggle, right? And so a recent book I read by a woman by the name of Ann Petrie, and if you've not read her book, The Street, you should. It was the first a novel written by an African-American woman to sell 1 million copies. But she talks about not talking about the plot of the story, but it's set in 1940s Harlem. Now, I've never been to 1940s Harlem, all right? But after reading her book, I think I know what 1940 Harlem smells like, tastes like, feels like, through her symbolic language, right? Again, there are a lot of things about what Dr. Ridley talks about I agree with, but this is my first kind of pushback with it, right? I also think of the book Fortunate Son I read by Walter Mosley. It's set in Southern California. I read that book in the winter, and I could feel the Southern California sun on my face reading that book in the winter through his language. So that's symbolic language. I listen to a lot of rap freestyle sometimes. I'm no rapper, right? But because we're in Philadelphia, a very viral kind of freestyle rap was by a guy by the name of Black Thought. And he has a very small, he has a lot that he says, but there's a line in there that has always captured me, and it actually is because of Dr. Asante. I don't know if you've ever seen his passport, but it looks different. But Black Thought makes a comment within this rap that he says that my passport pages will remind you of War and Peace. Now, I've never read War and Peace, but I know that War and Peace is a very large book. And through his symbolic language, he's telling you that he is a world traveler without saying he's a world traveler, right? This is symbolic language that is inspiring. Sometimes it's just entertaining. And so this was my initial kind of pushback, right? As I'm reading about symbolism and wondering, okay, is symbolism all bad? But where I did land in agreement with Dr. Ridley is where we start looking at how symbolism sows division. And there are lots of examples, and there are kind of three that I fell on, and that's within religion, race, and nationalism. And these three things are tricky because the language that they use appears to be unifying, right? If you spent any time in church, there's a lot of unifying sounding language until you get to the end and it's time to die, and then you don't get to go, right? So we're unified until the end, because if you're not following my rules, you don't get to go with me, right? But it's draped in this kind of unifying language. So it's dangerous, and it's a little tricky. The same thing with race, right? We can get into racial solidarity to a fault, to where it's just about us. But if there's an us, then that means there's a them, right? And so that is division. So you may be speaking of unification, but really the underlying is division. Us and them means division. And then there's nationalism, and we are in the midst of that right now, right? And nationalism is really difficult because nationalism will wrap itself in additional symbols. So there are flags, right? And there are anthems, all of these things that make you feel like we're together. But if it's us, there's them, right? And so those are really the areas in which this kind of symbolism becomes dangerous, because we have killed and bombed and enslaved in the name of religion, race, and nationalism. And so this is where I feel alignment with Dr. Ridley, where he talks about if we get caught in this symbolic thought process, this is where we do one another harm in the name of unity, right? And so I think this is kind of what we call a sleight of hand, right? Where we think we're doing things that are positive when in reality we're doing things that are our own destruction. And so that's kind of been my journey with this information, and as I've grappled with it, and I'm really thankful for it. And people who are radical thinkers who come up with things that are worthy of critique. So it's not just it's radical and, oh, I agree with all of it. That is not as important as radical thinking that you then grapple with, and you agree with some of it, and you disagree with some of it, and you fight with it, because I think on the other end is where you really come out better. And so that's where I have landed with this. It's been thought-provoking, and it's kind of instigated me to think about change, right? Not abandon symbolism that I feel is positive. I will not abandon that. But also to be very comfortable critiquing the symbolism that is harmful. Thank you, guys.
Brilliant work. Wow. Well, I'm gonna tell you, you guys are smart. I'm just, I'm really serious. Ayo starts off, and Mario brings it home, and it's just, I don't think I've ever been at a conference or a symposium where I've just learned so much and my mind has just been expanded. But thank you so much. Are there any questions or interests? Yes, or Ronaldo. Do we need the microphone? Yes. Can you get that? Thank you, MK.
I grew up, I graduated high school in Prince George's County. So I know that whole DMV area has got to be in an uproar now about the federal stuff in terms, because it was my father's generation that really helped build the black middle class. Maryland, Northern Virginia, and in DC, Marion-Barry, all of that stuff. And I'm like, has anyone done a projection of what the economic impact is going to look like?
No, the Guardian actually did an article talking about the destruction, what I talked about regarding, the Guardian actually did an article recently that talks about the impact, the negative impact and the destruction that will happen to the black community based on what's happening with the federal government. And there are some other things going on, going back to your Afrofuturism concept. They're getting rid of the FAA flyers, right? And they're, FAA, they want to close down the FAA, and then they're replacing it with Starlink or whatever those people are. And so the whole thing is they want to use Afrofuturism, and I think of Afrofuturism because they want to colonize Mars. They're sending spaceship despite it being blown up, and they're under an investigation because their whole idea is to take the rich there. That's why they don't care about destroying the earth and global warming and all of that stuff. So it's all connected. And if we do the research and we just kind of follow the breadcrumb, we'll see it happening.
And the way Dr. Ayo brought out, it's so crazy when you think about the women and minorities that have been there that got secret clearances with the government that could just put out, hey, I'll go to work for Germany or whatever, and just go on the market. It didn't make any sense. You let people go with high-level clearances that actually knows how the system works. That's the part that's so idiotic about it. So
yes. Well, all right. There's another one in the corner, Dinknesh.
Okay. Dr. Asante, you know what I want to say to her, right? I've been working on that proposal for the language, and I'm hoping so I can have a little audience with you on Ebonics and the relationship to learning to decode English and those concepts. Yes. I'm so happy to see you.
I wrote a book, on poetical science that I created, a paradigm that I created, that talk about how poetry and language linguistic imperialism can be an history marker, so we can use it as an ethnographic research, because we talk about storytelling. Storytelling is our cultural way of passing down information, and if we keep telling those stories, we can use it to chronicle history and policy and politics. So that's what my book is about.
And taking those stories that they're learning at home, our stories, when they go in the classroom, we know as reading instructors that we have to build schema. We have to start where they are, and then they're just there with all of these new stories and new sounds, and so, okay, yes.
Yeah, no, and just one last point. For those of you who are teachers and educators, homeschoolers, parents, Dr. Nadav have a book coming out about teaching teachers and parents, because in this day and time where our information is being dismantled and we are not going to get the correct information to teach our children, we're going to need the real information that Mama Na over here is putting down. We need to all pick it up because we're going to need it. They're taking away all of the things. Come on, Rosa Parks sat down because she was tired? Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, go to Universal Right Publications and look at the type of books we're publishing. I've published Dr. Asante. I've published some prolific scholars. We talk about Saku. The real fight is over the mind of Black people because that's where the real war is being taught. Go to UWP Books because we publish only Black scholars who are Afrocentric in mind, thought, and practice. That way you know that the work that you're using in your classroom with your children are vetted by the right people. So anyway,
Thank you. That's good. All right.